Electrolysis is a practical technique which allows us to break ionic substances into simpler substances using electricity. The apparatus will vary from experiment to experiment, but a typical setup is shown on the screen. You need an electrolysis cell, a power supply, leads, crocodile clips, and ignition tubes if you're going to collect gases. Here we can see the cell which has been filled with the electrolyte, which is the solution we're going to electrolyse. Placing ignition tubes over the electrodes is quite tricky. The ignition tubes should be filled with the electrolyte and a small piece of filter paper placed on top. This allows us to invert the ignition tube without losing the electrolyte. The mouth of the ignition tube should be carefully lowered into the electrolyte and a pair of tweezers used to retrieve the filter paper. It is then important to remove some of the electrolyte before the ignition tube is fully lowered over the electrode. This can be done using a plastic pipette. When this process is complete, we can do the same thing again with a second ignition tube. Before beginning the electrolysis, we should remove some of the electrolyte using the pipette. This will prevent it from overflowing. At this point, any spillages of electrolyte should be mopped up. We can then connect our electrodes to the power supply. This is done using leads with crocodile clips attached. The power supply should be turned on with the voltage set to 0. We can then slowly increase the voltage, watching carefully to see what happens in the electrolysis cell. If you see vigorous bubbling occurring, you should turn the voltage down immediately. However, in this case at 12 volts we see only gentle bubbling occurring, which indicates the reaction is completely under control. When the ignition tubes are full of gas, the power supply should be turned off. Your teacher will tell you what you need to do next. You may be required to carry out some tests on the gases that you've collected in the ignition tubes. It is important to think carefully about what you've observed in this experiment.